talking about suffering in 1 Peter, Peter said, arm yourselves with this mind, for Christ also suffered once for sin. In other words, arm yourself with the attitude, I may be called upon to suffer. Don't go into that situation unarmed. Don't go into the situation assuming nobody will ever ask me to make that sacrifice. I'll never be faced with this difficult choice between obedience to God and obedience to secular authority. If you get into that situation without facing these issues beforehand, you're unarmed. Peter said, arm yourself with this mind. Make a decision now. Settle it in your minds how you're going to act. It says about those that brought down Satan's kingdom from the heavenlies in Revelation 12, verse 11, one of my favorite scriptures, they overcame him. How? You know that? By the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Does the verse end there? No. What else does it say? They loved not their lives unto the death. I was called up into the British Army in 1940. I served 5.5 years. Reluctantly, let me say. It was not my choice. But when I joined the British Army on the 12th of September 1940, they did not give me a little certificate saying, we guarantee you, you will not get killed. No army has ever made that commitment. And I hear Christians talk about being soldiers in the Lord's army. I don't think they've ever stopped to consider what they're saying. This is a serious business. I think you've probably heard what Brother Andrew said about the commission, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every nation. His comment was, Jesus didn't say anything about coming back. People say we can't go because we won't come back. Jesus didn't say come back. He said go. Now you have to hear from the Lord. I'm not saying leave this place immediately and go to Albania. But may God go with you if you do. What I'm saying is, well, what Paul said, if in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most to be pitied. If all the gospel does for us is in this life, we might as well give up now.
Then said Jesus unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. 3 things that Jesus said. Let a man deny himself, let him take up his cross, and let him follow me. In a book called The Age of Longing, an American girl married a radical revolutionary in Paris. She had lost her faith at an American university, lost all the religious faith she had and all the things her parents had told her, and had gone to Paris, and there she met a revolutionary, a radical. And she was asked why she married him. And she said, he's the first person I've ever known who believes something strong enough to die for it. And although I don't believe exactly as he does, I was attracted to this man who had found a cause. I find that young people today are looking for a cause, and they're not looking for something easy. A university student in Moscow told one of my colleagues some time ago when he was visiting there, said, you Christians say that you're going to win the world, but we've done more in 50 years than you've done in 2,000 years. And you know why? It's because you're uncommitted. We are. We'll win. You'll see. I'm using those illustrations for this purpose. This sounds very much like the writing of the early church. This was the dedication to Christ 2,000 years ago by a group of young revolutionary young people that went out to change the world with love instead of hate. Young men that had committed their lives to a person called Jesus, whom they believe had been raised from the dead, and they were ready to die for his cause. Somewhere along the line, we've lost the meaning of discipleship. We've lost the meaning of what it really means to follow Jesus Christ. And I think that perhaps what we see going on in the campuses today is beginning to teach us something about dedication and what small minorities can do if they're dedicated to a cause. And when you come to the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, God does not demand any less of us in our relationship to Jesus Christ. You look in the Old Testament and see what God demanded of Abraham. God said one day, Abraham, I want you to go out to Mount Moriah, and I want you to take your little son, the son that you've waited so many years for, the son that you love more than anything in the world, and I want you to offer him on the altar. And Abraham obeyed God and went out and put his son on an altar and took a long gleaming knife and was plunging it toward his son's heart in obedience to God, when God stopped him in midair and said, that's far enough, Abraham. I know now that you're ready to go all the way with me. Or Moses. Moses was the foster son of Pharaoh's daughter. He was heir to the throne of Egypt. He could have been the emperor of the greatest empire in the world of his day. He had all the riches and all the glory and all the power that a man could have. And he deliberately turned his back on it in order to suffer with the people of God. God demanded that Moses give up everything in order to be used. And then God put him on the backside of the desert to study and to pray and to grow and to learn. Look what God caused Joseph. Joseph was sold by his brethren, had to go down into Egypt a stranger. He could have compromised. Nobody would have ever known it except God. And Potiphar's wife was very beautiful and very alluring. Joseph was a young teenager, hundreds of miles from home. Nobody would have ever known. He knew that he could have advanced in the kingdom, but he refused. He left his cloak behind when she grabbed at him, and it meant prison for him, and he was sentenced to death. God was testing to see if this young man really meant it. Or you could take Daniel. They said, Daniel, no more prayer in Babylon. If you do, you're going to go to the lion's den. Daniel prayed 3 times a day and believed in God and trusted in God, even though he was the prime minister of the country. They put him in a lion's den, and Daniel did not know that God was going to close the lions' mouths. God was calling upon him to pay the supreme price, and he was willing to do it. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament, who carried the message of Christ in that early church, said 5 times in 2 Corinthians 11, 5 times I received 40 stripes, save 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned, and 3 times I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I've been in the deep, in journeyings often, in perils in the waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of mine own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in perils and journeyings often, in hunger and thirst, in cold and in nakedness. I've carried this message of the gospel. That's what it cost. And Jesus is saying to us, take up your cross, deny self, follow me, and we can change the world. And he set the pace. You see, we seek riches, but he was rich, and yet he became poor for our sakes that we might become rich. We seek comfort, but the foxes have holes and the birds have nests and the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. We seek acceptance, but he was despised and rejected of men. We want to avoid suffering, but he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. We're self-centered, but he said, I lay down my life for others. He was centered in other people. Christ taught it. He lived it. He demands it of us no less. Then said Jesus to his disciples, if you want to follow me, you'll have to deny self and take up the cross and follow me. Are you willing to do that tonight? If it means everything? He lays down the conditions. And only a few in our generation are willing to pay that kind of a price. You see, when you pick up the New Testament, the words that you read about Christianity are verbs, not nouns. The word fight, suffer, put to death, agonize, wrestle, endure, run, resist, work. Those are the verbs that moved the early church to discipleship. A discipline under the lordship of Christ. And the Christian is described in the New Testament as a soldier who must suffer hardship. Thou therefore endure suffering and hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ, Paul wrote to Timothy. He asks you to enlist in his army. He'll send you to boot camp, maybe to a Bible school, or maybe to a Christian school, or maybe he'll send you in some other direction to learn, to study. God uses only prepared people.